Appliance shopping shouldn't be overwhelming. It should be exciting. The experts at Bray & Scarf understand this, and they're ready to wow you with a Labor Day sale happening now. Not only will they answer your questions, they'll offer you deals like up to 40% off select GE appliances. Plus, free basic installation on select GE Profile and Cafe appliances. No pressure, just professionalism. At Bray & Scarf, where it doesn't cost more to get more.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
A sweet escape, a guilty pleasure, a moment of solitude. Whatever you want to call it, your time on the toilet should be considered sacred. For some, it's a mental pause from a busy workday. For others, maybe it's a moment of silence from a house full of kids. And whether you're actually conducting business or simply just enjoying the four walls from a lower point of view, it is you time. But like a lot of things in life, the very thing that you may love the most, unfortunately, might not be too good for you. In this case, using your phone while answering nature's call. A recent study published in the PLOS medical journal found that those who use their smartphones on the toilet were at an increased risk of getting hemorrhoids because of the fact that they were usually sitting there for longer periods of time. So what happens now to that little piece of your day you might have looked forward to the most? And how exactly should we be doing business in a way that doesn't put us at risk? I'm Maria Kestane, and today on The Big Story, I'm talking to Dr. Trisha Pasricha, an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and the senior author of this study, to discuss how exactly a seemingly innocent scroll session might actually be doing more harm than we thought. Dr. Pasricha, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So before we dive deep into your study, tell me what drew you to put these two concepts, using your phone on the toilet and negative health outcomes, together. Was there a personal experience that you wanted to investigate more on, or was it just out of curiosity?
Great question. So I'm a gastroenterologist, so I see patients in my GI clinic all the time. And for years, all of us in the GI community have sort of had this sense that scrolling on the toilet can't be good for you. It's probably not good for you. And the main concern we had was hemorrhoids. Now, hemorrhoids are this entity that a lot of people probably heard of, probably know that they don't want, but it's not at the top of everyone's radar. And it's certainly not something that we're talking about all the time at brunch or when we're out with friends and things like that. But it's actually very, very common. It's actually the third most common reason that people come to GI clinic. And the idea behind this study about why smartphones could be related to, of all things in the world, hemorrhoids, was because we've sort of had hints over the years in different studies that length of time spent on the toilet could be linked to hemorrhoids. And so despite knowing that we sort of say this all the time, when I went back to the literature to try to figure out, well, what is the data that this sort of advice is based off of? The data is actually pretty scant out there, and there certainly hadn't been any studies that have looked at what happens in our smartphone era specifically and how people are behaving on the toilet, how smartphones have changed this aspect of our life, even though we know smartphones have changed so many other aspects of our life. It's changed how we eat, how we dine, how we sleep, and not for the better for the most case. But there was this older study from 1989 that was published in The Lancet. It was a lovely study, about 100 patients who came in, and there they found that people who spent longer reading the newspaper on the toilet, that was linked to hemorrhoids. And that's really what sparked me to think, one, I don't know who reads a printed newspaper on the toilet anymore, and bless them for doing that if you do, but I think all of us are bringing our smartphones into the toilet, whether we want to admit that out loud or not. And so I thought certainly some of these dynamics have to have changed, and I wanted to really understand how and whether that risk is changed from when we were using more printed reading material.
So let's get into the study itself exactly. How did you and your team come to these results?
Yeah. So one thing we knew we wanted to do when designing the study was to get a really objective look at the hemorrhoids. So hemorrhoids are actually a little bit harder to diagnose on your own than you might think. Like you can feel them if they're external, but we also have internal hemorrhoids, which you actually can't feel and appreciate. They grow and they become bigger until one day they might burst, and then you might see some blood in your stool, and that can be obviously really concerning, but you actually can't diagnose them yourself. You need someone to take a look. So what we did is we looked at all of our patients who were coming into our endoscopy center for a screening colonoscopy. So these were otherwise healthy people, aged 45 or older, who were just coming in for a routine screening colonoscopy. We interviewed them and asked them about their health habits, their health history, whether they used their smartphone on the toilet, what they did on their smartphone, how long they spent on the toilet, a lot of these different kinds of questions, and also ask them about other kinds of factors that are traditionally associated with hemorrhoids. So things like straining when you're trying to have a bowel movement, constipation. For women, pregnancy is a risk factor, childbirth. So we asked about all those things. And then we took them back for the screening colonoscopy and took a look and documented, do they have hemorrhoids? Do they not? And then afterwards, 2 other endoscopists reviewed the images and agreed upon whether they felt that this person did or didn't have hemorrhoids to make extra sure that we were making an objective assessment. And then we looked at all that data and we built a regression model to really identify what contribution of this risk of hemorrhoids was being brought upon by smartphone use specifically. And what we found was that smartphone use on the toilet, after controlling for a lot of these other traditional risk factors, that in and of itself was associated with a 46% increased risk of having hemorrhoids.
So you mentioned it a little bit, the pain of hemorrhoids and how they can be internal and external. For those who don't know exactly what hemorrhoids is or how to get them, can you give us a little overview of that?
Yeah. This is one of my favorite topics. So hemorrhoids, so despite what it may sound like, we actually all have hemorrhoids. The hemorrhoids are actually just these normal cushions of veins that sit at the bottom part of our colon called the rectum. And it's only really when those veins become engorged, bulky, and the connective tissue surrounding them weakens that we notice them, and then we call them hemorrhoids, but they've been there the whole time. And they can start on the inside of our colon, and those are called internal hemorrhoids, and sometimes they stay there, but they can also happen on the outside. Those are called external hemorrhoids, and those are the kinds that we can sometimes feel and appreciate. The reason this distinction is important is because the external hemorrhoids are often the ones that really trouble people. They cause bothersome symptoms, such as this sensation when you're sitting that there's something there. It can be uncomfortable. It can be itchy. There can be some soilage around them. All of these things are tremendously embarrassing to patients, and it can really kind of decrease your quality of life, decrease your sort of ability to have intimacy with people. And so they're really important, even though we're just not talking about them so much. And the idea with smartphone use on the toilet is that when you're sitting on a chair, on an open bowl, which is the toilet, without any pelvic floor support, there's sort of this increased amount of pressure. And that increased amount of pressure, if you're doing this for long periods of time, several minutes, every single day, over years, our hypothesis is that that's what compounds and eventually develops these kind of symptomatic hemorrhoids. Smartphones, I think, are very different from what we used to do in the past when we were just reading whatever reading material there was, a magazine, comic book, old shampoo bottle, you name it. Now we have these smartphones that are expressly designed to maximize our time on them. And so we're just watching TikTok after TikTok, and we kind of lose track of how much time we spend in there. And it's very different than just reading like a 3-day-old newspaper article and being like, am I done here? I don't really want to read the financial section next. Let me move on. Here, it's like exactly what you want to see next. And it's very easy to lose track of time.
Yeah, you mentioned how sitting in an open toilet bowl with no support to your pelvic floor is kind of the part that makes us vulnerable to those hemorrhoids. Are there any other surfaces that, or I guess, times where we are vulnerable to getting hemorrhoids, like in other aspects of our lives?
Yeah, so smartphone use has not been identified this way before this study, but there are other risk factors that have been described in the literature over the years. So and some of them have really borne out in multiple studies, some a little bit less so, but some of the ones that we think about traditionally are constipation and more specifically straining, like the amount of pressure you have to generate to kind of make that Valsalva maneuver, which we all have to do to some extent, but some more than others. That straining component can really contribute to hemorrhoids. There have been some studies that have linked fiber intake, so how much fiber we have in our diet. And I'll tell you, in the U.S., more than 90% of us are not getting our daily recommended amount of fiber. So it's like a very simple thing, or at least it's easier said than done. But if you increase the amount of fiber in your diet, it's going to certainly help with your risk of hemorrhoids, help with your constipation, decrease your risk of colorectal cancer. The list goes on and on. It's a very important thing to do. Pregnancy is a well-described risk factor in childbirth. And even something just as simple as a sedentary lifestyle. So physical activity, how much you're sitting all day at work. A sedentary lifestyle has been described as a risk factor for hemorrhoids. And so just as we know that having increased physical activity is really important for lots of other aspects of your health, well, surprise, it can also help kind of decrease your risk of hemorrhoids as well.
You mentioned certain lifestyle points of which that make us vulnerable. I'm wondering if there are any certain populations that are specifically vulnerable. I mean, we know women do sit on the toilet more often than men do, just by nature. And younger people are more likely to have their phones on them wherever they go compared to other populations that maybe, aren't so keen to have their phone and take their phone wherever they go.
Yeah, these are really good questions. So our study was done in patients who are age 45 and older. So patients who are 45 years and older, that's sort of the age at which people should come in to get their screening colonoscopy. And actually, on average, people were in their 60s who were in our study. Because of that, we ended up with this population, about 2/3 of them endorsed using their smartphone on the toilet and 1/3 didn't. And that actually was helpful for us statistically because we had this kind of control group to which we could compare the smartphone users against non-smartphone users. My guess is that if we were to do this in a younger population, say college-age students, which is actually something we're studying right now, it's going to be heavily skewed towards smartphone users. Like, it's going to be very hard to find that control population of people who don't bring their smartphones in. So I do think that younger people are doing this more often. And I think something that we need to determine in more research is, well, is it simply a question of age, or is it more a question, which is what I think this is, about for how long you've been spending longer? Meaning, I think younger people, they've been bringing their smartphones in since, they were much younger, like their whole lives, they've grown up with smartphones. And so I think that doing this over time and spending longer inadvertently on the toilet, just because you're having a nice time, like watching these reels or these TikToks, I think that builds over time, and it may accelerate, and this is the hypothesis, but it may accelerate how quickly you get hemorrhoids. And some colleagues I've spoken to feel that they're starting to see hemorrhoids in a younger population. This hasn't been objectively shown yet for a number of different reasons, one of which is that it is just actually hard to document what is the prevalence of hemorrhoids in the community, because it's one of those things that you actually need to take a look inside to really know. You mentioned something about possible sex differences, and certainly women spend longer sitting on the toilet to go to the bathroom to urinate. Men and women usually are both sitting for, everyone's doing their own thing, but for it to have a bowel movement. We did wonder, though, if there would be a sex difference. We weren't powered to adequately show this, but there was this trend that showed that men spent longer on the toilet than women during a bowel movement. I tend to believe that trend based on what I've seen in my own clinic. I think that pattern holds true. But I think we need to do more studies to really understand and then sort of see how can we maybe target the exact right population who would benefit most from this message.
I think it's also important to mention that sitting on the toilet for a long time can't necessarily be attributed to just your phone. You mentioned that, we used to have books and magazines and old shampoo bottles. And we were there. We were reading them and we were engaging with that and sitting for a long time. Are those things at fault here too, or is it just the phone to blame?
It's a good question. So in our study, we also asked, how are you somebody who also reaches for other reading material? And it actually turned out that the people who use their smartphones in the bathroom are also more likely to want to just read something when they're in there. And so what this tells me is that, one, I actually think it's totally natural, totally normal. We have been doing this since the dawn of time. It is normal to read in the bathroom and to want to read something in the bathroom, because I think reading actually is this kind of like mild, pleasant, quick distraction that helps you relax very quickly. And you need to relax in order to have a bowel movement. The sphincters have to open. I think the problem comes in when whatever it is that you're reading is too engaging, it's too exciting, it's too engrossing, and you start to forget why you went into the bathroom in the first place. And I think it's a lot easier for that to happen in our smartphone era than probably it was in the past. And, everyone probably remembers from their childhood, people used to have these whole magazine stacks in there. They had little mini bookshelves in their bathrooms. All that is fine as long as you weren't spending hours in the bathroom. And that did even happen back then, of course. There was engrossing novels and things that people were reading. But I just think it's much more common, much more easy with this smartphone. So based on this study, my advice is actually not to tell people don't read in the bathroom. Reading is what's bad for you. I don't think that's the case at all. I do tell people try not to bring your smartphone in there, because I think the smartphone, you lose control when you bring the smartphone in. I think when you have some reading material that you otherwise enjoy, like great, then you can kind of say, you know what, I'm done here. I've read this chapter. It's good. I've completed the job I went in here to complete. With the smartphone, the next TikTok just starts playing, and you don't really have agency to kind of like check in with yourself.
Yeah, I was gonna say it is a relaxing thing, and I'm definitely guilty of it. I think many people bring their phone in the bathroom. I am one of those people. What do you what do you tell to people like me, or I guess the general public, that this is kind of just a habit? Like, is it like do or die? Should I stop doing it altogether? Like, what do you tell people like me?
Yeah, I try to tell people to not bring their smartphones into the toilet because of hemorrhoids. I have heard from a lot of my fellow mom friends, I have 2 toddlers, that people say, but the bathroom is my only me time. Like, this is my safe space. Like, I enjoy doing this. And my goal in life is not to take away anyone's joy. But I think if you're going into the bathroom for a little escape, just put the toilet seat down and just have a seat. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to actually like put your britches down and sit on this open bowl. If you actually, what you need is the escape. Like, ask yourself, what am I really doing this for? Right. And I think in the scheme of things, hemorrhoids, there are some cases where hemorrhoids can cause life-threatening bleeding, and that's a big deal. Most of the time, though, it's not going to be the thing that kills you, thank goodness. So in the scheme of things, is this the worst thing that can happen to you? No, hemorrhoids are very common. Like, they're actually more common than you think. But it can be very embarrassing. It can be very stigmatizing. And obviously, everyone who has hemorrhoids is not going to say, "Oh yeah, I wish this upon my friends." Nobody would say that. So I think it's something that, like, I wouldn't beat myself up over. But I think there's, very simple steps you can take to minimize your risk of this happening. One is, if it's too hard for you to bring your smartphone in, then do what I do, which is I tell my patients, set a 5-minute rule, or do just a 2 TikTok rule. Like, after 2 TikToks, check in with yourself. Like, am I done here? Am I even trying to do the thing that I wanted to do in the first place? Or have I gotten so distracted that I should get up, take a breather, and come back later? So just check in with yourself. I think that's important. But bringing your smartphone to other areas of your life, I think, probably have more, in the scheme of things, more lasting damage, right? Like, bringing your smartphone to bed leads to insomnia, makes you have, trouble falling asleep, and your daytime performance can be impaired. Bringing it to the dining table can really impact your social connectedness. I think as a society, those are probably the bigger battles we want to fight. But as a gastroenterologist, this one really hits home for me.
Are there ways people can be, I guess for people that don't really want to change their lifestyle habits, that will continue to take their iPad or their tablet or their phone in the bathroom, are there ways, I guess, they can mitigate the negative outcomes of sitting on a surface where your pelvic floor isn't being supported? Are there pelvic floor exercises that you could do? Or are there other, I guess, things that, if you want to beat around the bush and kind of get ahead of the issues, or is this like a you got to fix your habits situation?
I really want people to fix their habits. However, there's not been a study that shows, doing this will prevent your risk of hemorrhoids. But there is one thing that I tell everybody to do when they go in the bathroom, smartphone or not, which is to use something, a stool, stack of books, whatever you have, that elevates your knees above the level of the waist. And what that does is, basically, if you think about your colon as this long tube, we actually have a second muscle that actually chokes that tube closed, kind of creates this angle called the puborectalis muscle. And when we're able to raise our knees above our waist, so we're creating not this like straight 90-degree angle where we traditionally sit on the bowl, but actually something that like kind of gives it that angle a little bit more give, then the tube opens up, because that puborectalis allows that kind of choked off tube to straighten. You're able to have a much more easy, smooth bowel movement quickly than you would if you don't do that. And what that really harkens back to is when before the toilet bowl was ubiquitous in everyone's house, people were just squatting. And squatting is probably the most natural, best position to have a good bowel movement. It's obviously not the best for a lot of people's joints, for people who have mobility and balance issues, but it was the best for having an effective bowel movement. So doing something like this, like having a stool under your feet, can kind of remove some of those muscles back into the position they need to be in.
Is there a specific time frame we should be aiming for while we're doing business in the bathroom?
So we are most physiologically primed. There were a couple of times during the day to have a bowel movement. So within the first 1.5 to 2 hours is actually when our colon is most awake. Like our colon follows a circadian rhythm like everyone else. So this idea of like going in the morning is based on the fact that your colon is most active then. But there are other things that kind of prime people to have a bowel movement and ramp up that activity of contractions, which would be things like exercise, like going for a walk, going for a run. That actually speeds up your colon. And then every time you eat, like there are a lot of people who like every time they just have a couple of like bites of food, suddenly they have to go to the bathroom. Well, it's not because the food they just ate has suddenly made it all the way through their intestine. It's because of this thing called the gastrocolic reflex, meaning whenever you eat something and it hits the stomach, it sends this reflex up to your brain, which signals back down to your colon that it's time to evacuate. And so there's no necessarily right time to do it. The right time is the time that is most comfortable and socially appropriate for you. However, your body is physiologically primed to do it at certain times of the day. And if you can lean into that, then that's fantastic.
Okay, let's say we lean into that. How long should we be in the bathroom for?
You should aim to be in the bathroom no more than 5 minutes. And if you are in the bathroom more than 5 minutes, you really should ask yourself, am I in the bathroom for 5 minutes because I'm totally distracted and I'm just like kind of having a good time in there? Or because you're struggling to have a bowel movement, because the effort you're putting in like doesn't seem to be getting the result. And if it's the first case, maybe we need to address the smartphone issue. If it's the second case, maybe you should talk about it with your doctor, because constipation in general, pelvic floor dysfunction in general is actually very common. We have lots of tools that we can treat that with, but you kind of need to have a conversation about it to get that started.
What I also am curious to know is I think a lot of people think that like, okay, if I go to the bathroom and sit on the toilet and I just relax myself, maybe a bowel movement can come the longer I sit on the toilet. Is that a myth, or are you just kind of wasting time?
I love that you ask that. I think you can train your body to kind of lead into some of these signals about your environment and behaviors that would help you have a bowel movement. But I think if you are sitting there and it's been 5 minutes and the magic is not happening, I do think you should get up and go, because I think that's a fair amount of time to say this is going to happen or not. And the longer you're sitting there, the more pressure you're putting on your pelvic floor, you're putting on those hemorrhoidal cushions. And I think at that point, the risks start to outweigh the benefits. So yeah.
Are there good bathroom habits to practice? You mentioned keeping a stool in the bathroom, but are there good things to keep in mind, both in the comfort of your own home or in a public space?
Oh, what a great question. There's so many answers to that. I've thought about this a lot. Well, I think I think the public space question is really interesting, right? It's common. We're all going to encounter this. We have all had to have a bowel movement in public. Like it's happened where we are just like have to have a bowel movement where the only option is a public restroom. It's not the safety and comfort of our own home. And what I think we all should do as a service to our neighbors is not linger on the smartphone when someone is in the stall next to you. That's rude. They want privacy. You would want privacy if you were in that situation. And if you're just sitting there scrolling on your phone, you should really think about like, how is this impacting the guy next to me who's like struggling as well? I think when you're in the safety of your own home, something that is a little bit less commonly thought about, I think in Western countries like Canada and the US, but very popular elsewhere, is a bidet. And when we say bidet, people are like, whoa, I don't know if I like want to go there. Like people are not used to trying new things back there. I get that. However, as a gastroenterologist, I love a bidet. They got it right with the bidet. And what it is just this kind of not, and there's like lots of different ways you can get it. There's like you can replace your entire toilet bowl with this like nice heated seat and this water, but, or you can just get like this attachment nozzle, but basically it eliminates the need for toilet paper. It is incredibly hygienic. And it actually is really nice for people who have hemorrhoids, who have fissures, who have any kind of even mobility issues. Like I recommend them to my patients with Parkinson's disease all the time who might struggle with movement. So you're not actually like having to balance and reach back there and wipe. It's great for pregnant women who are postpartum. So there's a lot of people who would benefit from them. But I will tell you, even people who think that they're otherwise healthy, I have never met someone who got a bidet and said anything other than, this was the best decision I ever made. So as weird as it sounds, I think it's great for hemorrhoids, it's great for your gut health, and it's also great for just a number of these different conditions. One day, when you are traveling abroad, Just go in there with an open mind, see what it's like, and you might realize you have been missing out your whole life.
All right, some great tips on a very important subject. Dr. Trisha Pasricha, Assistant Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That was The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. I'm Maria Kestane. Thanks for listening.